Entrepreneurs, business owners, professionals who seek excellence, bringing the business classroom to you. It's the Business Builders Show. Here's Marty Wolf.
We still got a long way to go. Yes, we all got a long way to go.
Welcome to the Business Builders Show with Marty Wolf, the show for entrepreneurs, business owners, and business leaders. I'm Marty Wolf, your host for the Business Builders Show, and along with my executive producer, DC Taylor, we will be your guides on this learning journey. Let me tell you my super objective in being with you today. I want to enthusiastically share stories and information to inspire leaders. That's you, by the way, so you can inspire others. My guest with me today is coming back, because I love him and his work so much, is Shawn Askinosie. Hi, Shawn. Welcome back.
Hi, Marty. Good to be back. Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to do a very brief intro, and because as we talk, you'll all hear all about Shawn and his work and all that kind of good stuff. But let's start this way. Askinosie Chocolate recently was named by Forbes, quote, one of the 25 best small companies in America. Askinosie Chocolate has also been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, on Bloomberg, MSNBC, and numerous other national and international media outlets. Shawn Askinosie was named by the Oprah magazine, quote, one of the 15 guys who are saving the world. Well, Shawn, you hit the big time. Now you're on the Business Builder Show. Right,
That's
buddy?
it. Of course.
Of course. All right, so let's kind of start at the beginning, I guess. So Askinosie Chocolate, tell me about your company and kind of how did you get there? So let's talk about that to start.
You bet. Well, I was a criminal defense lawyer for 20 years, and I specialized in really serious felony cases. Loved the courtroom, loved everything about it until I stopped loving it. And I think 20 years is a good term of service, and I needed to find something else to do, and I couldn't find anything. Having a lot of trouble really finding something that would be inspiring and would really be a project that I could be passionate about. I tried other areas of the law, that didn't work. Looked at all kinds of businesses. This was a 5-year-long process of trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I had no idea it would take that long at the time. And it was a struggle for me during those 5 years. But I started to have some hobbies, because hobbies, it's a good idea, to have something else, besides work. Mm-hmm. So I started grilling on my big green egg, and then I bought another one. And then I just did a lot of that. And then I started baking, made tons of cupcakes. And then I started making chocolate desserts. And one day I was driving to a relative of a distant funeral. And even though I'd been working with chocolate, I had no idea where it came from. But this idea came to me, hey, what about just making chocolate from scratch? Not knowing anything where it came from. But within 3 months of that idea, I was in the Amazon and studying how farmers influence the flavor of chocolate by how they grow these cocoa beans. And parenthetically, I would say I just got back from the Amazon 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And so it was my 43rd origin trip since I started the business. But that's how it started. And then now here we are. We have 17 full-time employees, and we're a very small company and by design. Mm-hmm. And we sell our chocolate all over the United States.
I like... Well, I like everything you're doing, but that journey, that 5-year journey, part of that journey was, I guess I'll call it a spiritual journey. Am I correct in that? Talk to me a little bit about that. Trappist monks and things like that. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Right. It was a spiritual journey. At the time, it was almost a spiritual journey by force or by default, because I was desperate, and I at that time was really experiencing some depression and anxiety related to all of this. And so it seemed like the harder I tried to find my next thing, the further out of reach it was. And that was really just, day by day, a lot of difficulty. And so during this time period, I decided to go to a nearby Trappist monastery in southern Missouri. And the reason I went there is because it was the place where my dad spent his last night on this earth. And when I was young, he died of lung cancer, and he was my hero. And anyway, he'd been on a men's retreat at this church, at this abbey, and he came home and died. And so I thought, fast forward the tape 25 years. For those of your listeners who don't know what tape is, it's a thing we used to have back a long time ago. But anyway, and I went to that monastery, and it was really part of the threshold that I talk about that really helped me. It really, and so I have now I have a 20-year relationship with that monastery, and I'm a family brother there, and it's influenced every aspect of my life and my business.
Yeah, incredible. And in 2017, I think that was the year you published your book. The book title is Meaningful Work, A Quest to Do Great Business, Find Your Calling, and Feed Your Soul. When did you decide to write the book, and what kind of inspired you, or what was the desire behind writing this book? What was driving that?
The first thing that drove it was, in all candor, an agent.
Okay, that's
so
all right.
I'd been approached by a number of people over the years to do that, to write a book, and I never really felt led to do it. And I also never really talked to an agent that I thought was really credible, if I could say that. And this person was, and the person who introduced me to her was a real inspiration to me and had written several books. And so I thought, well, this is a real possibility. And then I would say there was also a countervailing struggle with my spiritual director at the Abbey, who I write a lot about in the book, said to me, he's a very wise man and in his mid-80s, upper 80s now. He said, I've never felt called to write a book. I've felt called to live it out. And this is a guy who, if he wanted to, could have written 30 books, but and that really stuck with me. And so it had to really just be the right place, right time. And it took 3 years, and it was with my daughter, my co-author, Lauren.
Right.
And so I was running a business at the same time.
Yeah.
Traveling all over the world buying cocoa beans. But it was a great, all in all, it was a great experience. I'm so glad that I did it, and I wouldn't have changed anything, and I wouldn't have written a book sooner because I probably wouldn't have had very much to say.
Well, I'm glad you wrote the book, too, because that's how we started our relationship, and I love the book, and I follow what you do and all that kind of good stuff. Has anything surprised you since the release of the book? Comments? I'm sure there's been lots of comments. Has any responses surprised you in terms of feedback on the book?
I think one of the things I do is I catalog the people who write me about the book. And I told myself before the book came out what my measure of success was going to be. And that was people writing me who said that they'd read it and that it had influenced them in some way related to some action that they took, small or large. And so I would say maybe not so much surprised, but I would say heartened or grateful that has come true. And so I have really, I've really enjoyed hearing from people who've read it and just for whatever reason decided to share with me what it is that moved them in the book to some action. And that will often lead to a dialogue, and I've really, really enjoyed that, and I think I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And in some cases, I've just asked for a phone number and picked up the phone and called the person
Wow.
in some way, if I could be of some assistance in some way. I mean, I'm not a coach or anything like that, but I have really enjoyed those conversations and maybe been of some help in some ways.
How rewarding is that? So my guest is Shawn Askinosie. He is with Askinosie Chocolate. The book we're talking about is Meaningful Work, A Quest to Do Great Business, Find Your Calling, and Feed Your Soul. You want to get the book. You want to follow Askinosie Chocolate. Shawn is on most social media, definitely on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and probably on Twitter, I'm assuming.
I'm on Twitter.
Sure. So you're there. I'm seeing you, and I'm grateful to see everything you're doing there. So along the way, apparently an opportunity came along to do a TEDx talk. So give me the backstory there. How'd that happen? And what was that like? And let's get into the content in a minute.
Yeah, well, the people, there was an organizer of a TEDx conference in Oklahoma City who'd read my book, and that led he and his committee to reach out to me and ask if I'd be interested in doing a TEDx talk in Oklahoma City. And so that's how it all started. And it was a really long process in terms of, and there's a whole inside part of TEDx that I had no idea. It's very organized, and I had to have a TEDx coach. I was really happy about that. I loved that experience, and he was just amazing. And I had to have the script approved. It had to be word for word. I had to memorize the whole thing, 15 minutes, no notes, no prompts, no PowerPoint, no images, nothing. Oh, and I'm 58 years old, and memorizing stuff like that doesn't come as easy as it did when I was in high school. And so that the process in itself, and my coach said, if I'd like for this talk to be, if you were going to give a talk of a lifetime and this was going to be it, what would it be? And that changed the game for me. And I worked really hard on it. And I spent several months, and I have to say that, and my wife really helped me. She helped me edit this thing, and she listened to me give it hundreds of times. And she was just very patient and really helpful with me. And because of the content, which I know we're going to talk about, the biggest surprise for me, and I mean, I wrote the book, and it took 3 years to write the book. And writing this talk and preparing for it took, maybe 3 or 4 intensive months, if not longer than that. And I was surprised how the content of the talk wound its way through my body. So I had a lot of physical difficulties during the preparation of this talk.
Really?
And it's a really deep talk, and it really had a lot of effect on me, but I didn't know that it would, I mean, it was like someone at night or during the day even just put my whole interior soul in a Vitamix and just, turned it on high. And I didn't expect that. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. I don't know that I'll ever do it again, but because that's pretty much it, but I was glad to get it over with too, because it was hard. It was hard to do. It was pretty hard.
Well, starting a chocolate company from scratch, is not a day at the beach either, and writing a book isn't a day at the beach. But obviously you were moved, and if I get this right, I believe the title of the talk is Find Your Calling Where It Hurts. Is that correct? Right. So let me repeat that, because I want to make sure everybody understands the very title of your presentation. Find Your Calling Where It Hurts. You talk about a threshold. Let's start there, if you're okay with that,
Sure.
Shawn. You talk about a threshold in your TEDx talk. Explain what you mean by that.
The use of the word threshold, I got from poet-philosopher John O'Donohue, and I love all of the books and works by John O'Donohue, but I like in particular his discussion about about thresholds. Mm-hmm. And in particular, what I'm talking about in this threshold in the context of this talk is that many of us find our lives not at the beginning of one thing and the ending of another, but in the middle, between that space between I can't do this job anymore, and here I've now started this new career or started a new place, or I've been reaffirmed in the place that I'm already at. And this is a threshold. And I think it's a place that's worthy of a great review, reflection, meditation, prayer. And many of us find ourselves there. And sometimes they can be quite lengthy, and they can be turbulent, and can also be, just a great deal of sorrow.
Yeah, threshold, transition, whatever the right words are. You've set it up brilliantly, and you're talking about passion. We get to the part in your TEDx talk where you talk about where do we find our passion, and I think you use the words, it's an intersection of your skill sets, what the world needs, and our passion. I think most of us can understand skill sets and what the world needs. Let's talk about passion. And you have an extraordinarily unusual and insightful view of how to find your passion. Let me say the title of his talk again to set this up. Find your calling where it hurts. So talk to me about what you talked about in your TEDx talk.
Sure. As you stated, I think a lot of us know, or we can articulate our skills, talents, and what the world needs. But when you're looking for that intersection, well, where does all of that cross over with passion? I find that many people don't know where their passion is. That's the real trouble spot, because we can't fit it in the Google search box. We could, but what's it going to say? Ask Siri, what is my passion? Or ask Alexa, what is my passion? It just doesn't work. And so that requires a great deal of, if I could call it, maybe uncovering and interior work. And so for me, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the harder I tried to find it, the further out of reach it was. And so what I decided to do was look at the sorrow in my life, because I had this unwitting suspicion that my inability to find my passion was related to the grief in my life and the sorrow. And so I talk about this in the book, and I talked about this a lot in the TEDx talk, and that is the quote from poet-philosopher Khalil Gibran that I love, which is, "Our greatest joy is our sorrow unmasked." Our greatest joy is our sorrow unmasked. And that was the exploration for me. That was the pathway for me to begin to get to the other side of the threshold. And as I mentioned, for me, my greatest sorrow so far was my dad's sickness and death and his lung cancer. And that was a great sorrow for me, and being with him when he died, and all of that experience with the church. And it was just really traumatic for me as a 13-year-old, giving my dad pain shots of Demerol when he couldn't do it himself, and my mom couldn't bring herself to do it. And I did that as a 13-year-old. And then to have the church people say, don't talk with your dad about death, because if you do, it'll be a sign of doubt and he won't be healed. That was traumatic. And so what I talk about in this TEDx is that I had to kind of explore my own broken heart. And now we're getting to the part of where does it hurt? And so for me, I had to do something to explore that. And so, and this, what I'm talking about now, this is the most important part. And anybody can do this. Anybody who has had or has a broken heart. And if you don't have a broken heart, then please call me, and we need to have a 1-hour discussion about how we can break your heart, because you got to live life, and love and grief are just two sides of the same coin. And so anyway, so for me, the way to explore it wasn't to read about because I love to read. I'm reading 5 books at a time, but reading about it doesn't make us better at it. It doesn't really solve the problems for us. We need to do something. We need to take action. And so for me, the action as it related to where it hurt and my own broken heart was that I ended up becoming a volunteer while I was practicing law in the palliative care department of a local huge hospital. So on Fridays, I'd go visit people who were dying. Palliative care is just basically hospice in the hospital. And I would visit them on Fridays when I was in town. And these were people who'd asked for a visit, and they were in some stage of dying. And the way it worked was I would just go into their room and just talk to them as a volunteer from the hospital. And just a lot of them didn't have anybody there. So I talked about whatever, pie recipes, hunting, fishing, their younger days. And then at the end of my visit, I would always ask them if they wanted me to pray for them. And I sort of half jokingly say that one of the things I learned is that most people who are dying will take a prayer if offered. And this is the key. And this is, again, taking it a little bit deeper. I asked them, what would you like me to pray for? So I didn't just assume what they wanted, even after a long conversation. I wanted to hear from them. What would you like me to pray for? And I listened, and I prayed their words back to them, word for word. I would ask if I could, touch their hand or their shoulder while I prayed for them, using their own words. And that was very powerful. They would say, could you pray that I live 2 more weeks to my 60th wedding anniversary? Or could you pray that I die today because I'm in pain? And I listened and just prayed their prayer. And then not every time, but many times I would leave the front door of the hospital and walk to my car. And there were times when I felt like my feet weren't on the ground, that they were like 3 or 4 feet above the ground. And at first it was really confusing about what's happening here. And what's happening is that's what joy feels like. That's what immeasurable joy feels like. That's what it feels like when you uncover the greatest sorrow in your life. That's what Gibran was talking about. And the uncovering of that turns into joy. And this is, I think, where people get tripped up, even with my book and with the talk. And this is it right here. People say, wait, what does that have to do with chocolate? Walking out to your car and feeling that joy, or why didn't you just become a hospital chaplain? It's because that work, that uncovering was a bridge for me, and that kind of thing can be a bridge for many people. It was a bridge. It was the end of that part of the threshold. And so doing that work for almost 5 years allowed me the space to consider other options in my life that nothing else could have done. No book, no workshop or seminar or conference or friend or Google or anything could have done for me. It was that service to someone who needed me in that moment, and I was in the right place at the right time. That's how I did it.
Focusing on someone else other than yourself was your main message in the TEDx talk. So my guest is Shawn Askinosie. He is the president and CEO of Askinosie Chocolate. Yes, he does sell chocolate too, and lots of it. It was a wonderful job. You can go to askinosiechocolate.com to learn more. His book, again, is Meaningful Work, A Quest to Do Great Business, Find Your Calling, and Feed Your Soul. And yes, you can get his TEDx talk. And in case you're not hearing exactly how I'm saying his last name, it's spelled Askinosie, Shawn Askinosie. I think if you just Google his name, TEDx Oklahoma City, you will find the talk. It is powerful. You can tell just by the tone of Shawn's voice and how he delivers his message. This guy is the real deal. So there's some kind of late-breaking news that you want to share here, and something that's kind of current. It has to do with the Washington Post, I guess. Tell me about that. What's that all about, Shawn?
Sure. The Washington Post published a really important article, investigative piece last week called cocoa's child laborers. And this is very important to anyone. It should be important to anyone who likes chocolate. And that's a lot of people. That's $25 billion worth of business in the United States this year. And so it's important for people to check out the Washington Post article about child labor in the cocoa industry. And the article, in a nutshell, is essentially saying that the big chocolate companies of the world, the ones that you would imagine, Mars, Nestle, Hershey, and others, have not kept their promises with regard to the elimination of child labor, child slave labor in their chocolate businesses. And this is a big deal. These are little kids who are being held essentially as slaves. And when this first came up, people were asking us just that day, last week, what are you doing? And the answer is that, I've been doing this business for almost 14 years. I have personally visited the farmer groups every single year that I've bought beans from the farmer groups in Tanzania, the Philippines, Ecuador, and the Amazon. And as I mentioned, I just got back from the Amazon a couple of weeks ago. It was my 43rd origin trip. I visit these farms, and I can say that not one single visit to any farm in all these years have I ever witnessed anything remotely resembling child labor. And I have a provision in my contract with the farmers that they're not to use child labor. So it's been important to us from the beginning, and it's one of the reasons why we practice what we call direct trade, because I can control this. I go there, I inspect the beans, I make sure they meet our quality specs, I make sure they're not using pesticides and chemicals, and I also make sure that they're not using child labor. And so at the end of the day, what this really is, other than a very sad, terribly unjust situation, is it's an economic situation. And that it means like this: the commodity price for cocoa has, when adjusted for inflation, has remained unchanged in the last 30 years. Wow. That means that farmers in Ghana and Ivory Coast, where, by the way, most of this child labor problem is in West Africa, where almost the vast majority of cocoa beans come from, over 70% of the world's supply comes from there. And that's where this issue is. And those farmers, and this is what I'm about to say, this is it. This is the most important thing. Farmers in Ghana and Ivory Coast, for the most part, are living on $1 a day. That is well below the United Nations definition of extreme poverty. It's also in the countries where the government regulates the price of cocoa, in Ghana and Ivory Coast, to ostensibly protect farmers, but they don't. These are corrupt regulatory bodies in West Africa. And so these companies need to step up their game, and they need to eliminate this terrible, terrible thing as soon as possible, because people should not be buying chocolate if they know that it's been made with child labor.
So the Washington Post story, tell me again the title of the Washington Post story.
Yeah. Yes, it's called Cocoa's Child Laborers, and it was published last week.
If we go onto your website, can we find your either LinkedIn or your website some comments that you have made on this?
Yes, you can go to the Askinosie Chocolate Facebook page and find my comments and a really short video. And the article came out on June 5th last week in the Washington Post, and our response was the following day, last week.
Well, wow. D.C. Taylor, wow, huh?
Yes.
Guy kind of leaves you speechless.
Yeah.
I'm rarely speechless. So Shawn Askinosie has been my guest. Again, his book is Meaningful Work, A Quest to Do Great Business, Find Your Calling and Feed Your Soul. You can find Shawn Askinosie's TEDx talk at TEDx, his name, TEDx, Oklahoma City, and you can find the article that we've just been talking about. And so I said at the beginning of the show that Shawn was named by the Oprah magazine, in quotes, this says, one of the 15 guys who are saving the world. Shawn Askinosie, I'm proud that you're a friend, and thank you so much for being part of the show again.
Well, thank you, Marty. Thank you for what you do and this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Business Builders Show. To learn more about me, and I'm Marty Wolf, go to MartyWolfBusinessSolutions.com. That's MartyWolfBusinessSolutions.com. To learn more about Kelly Hoey, go to her website, which is jkellyhoey.co. That's jkellyhoey.co. And of course, you can find Kelly and Marty on LinkedIn and Twitter. A reminder, you can find all our Business Builders shows on iTunes, Spotify, and on your favorite podcast app.
Bringing the business classroom to you. It's the Business Builders Show with Marty Wolf.